Hi, Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I'm Arakir Galadirthan, the head of Divide and Conquer, a submod for a Total War mod of Medieval 2. But welcome today to a lore video for Sauron, the great enemy of Middle-earth in the Second and Third Ages. Now, this is the first lore video that I will cover where we talk about the evil side of Middle-earth. I've thought about which other evil nations to cover, but unfortunately a lot of their history is intertwined with Gondors and Rohans, particularly the Southrons and the Easterlings. Their history basically is the history of Gondor and Rohan, because all they really ever do is attack those nations and get beaten back. But Sauron is an evil that has persisted from pretty much from creation right through till his body's final destruction with the end of the War of the Ring. So I thought I'd deal with Sauron first. Now, there's quite a few little pictures of Sauron throughout this, and I've tried to go for drawings and sketches wherever I can, because I prefer those personally. But also because, for reasons unbeknown to me, the anime community absolutely loves the First Age of Middle-earth. And there are so many drawings of Elves and Valar and Maya in an anime way, it's so difficult to find ones that aren't. So sometimes I've had to settle for more gamified versions like the one you see before you there. I will also just briefly mention that this video won't really have too many dates, very few dates at all. I think there's about 4 throughout the whole thing. So much like the Astari video, this one will just lead on more like sort of like a discussion with only one member, if that makes sense, rather than a clear-cut chronology like the Gondor and Dwarven videos were. So, let us dive right in. Sauron. Sauron was a Maya, the same type of being as the 5 Astari, but lesser being than the Valar, the great gods of the heavens beneath Eru Ilúvatar, the One. And like all Maya, he ascribed to the teachings of a single Valar, and Sauron's chosen Valar was Orlais, the smith, the craftsman of the heavens, the creator of dwarves, and the wife of Yavanna, incidentally, the creator of Ents. Sauron was said to be very, very knowledgeable and very skilled in the crafts of Orlais, and he was quite a wise Maya from day one, really. We're not really sure how long it was before he fell under Melkor's grasp, but we do know that he was one of the first to fall, and he fell quite quickly. So, covetous of power may be a good way of describing Sauron, for Melkor had a single goal pretty much from the outset, and that is that he wanted control of the world for himself. And Sauron subscribed to this theory and joined with Morgoth. And he had joined with him very, very quickly. And he rose to become quite a chief lieutenant of Morgoth. But that is what most of the First Age deals with. So, Sauron, that's Sauron in before recorded history, as it were. Not much is really known of him at the very, very beginning, save for that he worked with Orlais and he was quickly ensnared by Melkor. But before the elves awoke and before the men awoke, Sauron was given his first command, and that was the charge of the garrison of Angband, or the great fortress of Angband, in the north of the world, to be honest. This was the second citadel of Melkor, being inferior only to Autumno itself, the great underworld castle, fortress, cavern system that Melkor lived in and operated within. And Sauron was given command of Angband. However, seeing when the elves awoke, the Valar obviously had great discussions and councils about how they were going to save them, and they saw that Melkor was twisting some of them and turning some of them, and the Valar eventually decided to attack and capture Melkor. And this they did. They besieged Angband and they almost destroyed it, because it was rebuilt, so they didn't fully destroy it, but they attacked Angband and they laid waste to it. But Melkor wasn't there, he'd fled to Autumno, and they couldn't find Sauron when they searched within Angband. And this is said to be because Angband had thousands of caves and a huge underground tunnel network, and Sauron is said to have just disappeared in amongst it, and the Valar just could not find him. And then they moved on to Autumno, they got Melkor, and they went back with Melkor to Aman. And then we don't know what happens to Sauron in this time. He's probably just mingling about, gathering all the armies that didn't get killed by the Valar, and he's probably reforming. Who knows? Anyone's guess. But the next time that he really features on the impacts of the world is after Melkor has been released from captivity in Aman. He destroys the 2 trees, Laurelin and Telperion, and he flees back to Middle-earth. And it's at this time that he comes back to Middle-earth, and he then rebuilds Angband, and he raises the Thangorodrim around it, which are 3 large volcanic peaks. And Melkor returns, and Sauron at this time returns to his service. And then time passes, and the elves begin to take up residence in Beleriand, even men begin to arrive in Beleriand, and after a while, an elven king named Finrod Felagund builds a tower called Minas Tirith. Now, it is not the Minas Tirith that you know of course. It does just mean the Tower of Guard. And he builds this atop an island in I believe it's is it the Syrian River? I'm not massively well versed in my first age, unfortunately. I find the third age and second age much more interesting. But anyway, he builds this on the Isle of Tol Sirion. And it's a very small island in a river, but it guards the passes of northern Beleriand. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I have a Beleriand map, but feel free to go and have a look on a map of Beleriand. And this fortress tower is on the island itself in the centre of the river, and it guards almost the entire southern access into the bulk of Beleriand from the north. And it's rather a thorn in the side of the forces of evil. And so, after a time, Melkor gets Sauron to take the Elven Isle from the Elves. And this he does. He besieges Tol Sirion, but by this time, Sauron has become an absolute master of evil magic. It's said that he even has the ability to trap souls into other beasts to then be able to command them to do his bidding. He is a master of sorcery, especially evil sorcery. And he comes upon Tol Sirion in such an awful and terrible sight that he basically scares the defenders away. The current garrison commander is an elf called Orodreth, and Orodreth flees before Sauron, and Sauron takes the isle, and it becomes known as Tol in Gorhoth. Now, Tol in Gorhoth means the Werewolf Isle, and this is because what you may have heard is true, that there are werewolves in the first age of Middle-earth. They're not really spoken of in the third or second age, but in the first age there are werewolves, and Sauron is said to have command over these werewolves. Indeed, he himself has the ability to take on a form of a werewolf, but then being a Maya, he can take on really any form he wants, so that's sort of irrelevant, but he chooses evil forms quite a lot. So anyway, he takes this island, and this is one of the key events in the Passage of Evil in the First Age, and it is attributed to Sauron. Tol in Gorhoth becomes kind of his headquarters, but then the events of the First Age pass, and Sauron plays little part, other than he is obviously the chief lieutenant. But eventually he's commanded to search out and hunt for a man called Barahir. Now, you may recognise the name Barahir, and those astute amongst you will know that Aragorn bears a ring called the Ring of Barahir, and it is this Barahir whom the ring passes down from. And Sauron sends out to hunt for Barahir in the lands of, I believe, Tol Nufuin, which is in the centre north of Beleriand. It's a mountain, it's an area that's gated, well, not gated, but bordered on the southeast and west by mountains. And Sauron searches for Barahir and his group of essentially freedom fighters. And he comes across them where he kills all of them. But then Beren, the son of Barahir, Beren of Beren and Luthien fame, he survives this onslaught because he was with the group, but he was sent ahead scouting and he's not caught up in it, and he survives. And then obviously bears great ill will towards Sauron. But after a time, Sauron manages to capture the High Elven King, the Noldorin King Finrod Felagund, the same Finrod Felagund who built Minas Tirith that I mentioned a moment ago, what the image we're still looking at. And Sauron captures Finrod and Beren, and he throws them both in the dungeons of Tol in Gorhoth, his evil version of this citadel. Now, in the dungeons of Tol in Gorhoth, they are left pretty much to their own devices, chained up with nothing much to do. And after a time, a wolf comes into the dungeon, whether by command or whether by its own volition. I'm not 100% certain. But a wolf comes into the dungeon and it attempts to slay Beren. It attempts to attack Beren. And Finrod breaks his shackles and breaks his bonds, and he fights off the wolf and he kills it, but it kills him in the process. So he dies in the dungeons of the very castle he built hundreds of years before. So now Beren is trapped in the dungeons alone, but at least he is alive. Now, of course, some of you may know the tale of Beren and Luthien, and you may know their love for one another, and Luthien comes for Beren to try and rescue him. And she stands upon the bridge of Tol in Gorhoth. Sauron is within the tower itself. And she stands upon the bridge of Tol in Gorhoth, but she brings with her Huan, the great hound of Valinor. He's said to be one of the hunting dogs of Arome, and he has a rather, what word do I want? Oracle-like part to play in the First Age. But Huan comes with Luthien, and she stands upon the bridge of Tol in Gorhoth, and she sings out. Now, Tolkien absolutely loves songs, and they have some sort of higher mystical power in Middle-earth. I don't particularly understand it, but there we are. Maybe I'm just not cultured enough. But Luthien sings out atop the bridge, and the song permeates through the dungeons, and Beren knows that she is there. But he is still mourning the loss of Finrod, and he's kind of in a stupor, almost like he's paralyzed with grief. But Sauron sends out his werewolves to try and stop Luthien, to try and kill her, basically. However, each werewolf that goes out mysteriously disappears, because Huan is killing them all silently as they come out along the bridge to kill Luthien. But then after a while, the chief and greatest werewolf, said to be the sire of all werewolves, is a werewolf/man called Draugluin, or Draugluin, sorry. And Draugluin is the greatest of the werewolves, and as I say, potentially the sire of them all. And he comes out and fights with Huan. And Huan bests him, but Draugluin manages to escape, and he crawls to the feet of Sauron, whereupon he dies. But before he dies, he says to him, Huan has come. Now Sauron, knowing Huan's little part to play in the First Age, he goes out onto the bridge himself in an attempt to then defeat Huan and Luthien himself. And he takes on the form of a mighty wolf. Now, apologies for the stretched image here, but at least it's bigger than it would be. That's a Ted Naismith one. But Sauron takes on the form of a great wolf, and he fights with Huan. But Luthien manages to do some sort of sleight of hand trickery thing, and she covers Sauron's eyes or something with a cloth or a cape or something like that. And Huan gets the jump on Sauron, and he manages to bite down on him. But then whilst Huan has got Sauron in his grasp, Sauron is shape-shifting like you would not believe. He first transforms into a serpent, and then he transforms into other evil creatures and beasts, and he's changing all the time on the floor, but Huan has hold of him. And then Luthien comes over, and she demands that the Isle be released to her. And Sauron, seeing that he basically has been bested, and if he doesn't agree, he's going to lose his physical form, which is always a bit of an annoyance for a Maya. He agrees to surrender the Isle, and he turns into a vampire. Because this man loves evil. But he turns into a vampire, and he doesn't necessarily... But then the description from the Silmarillion is more so that he kind of transforms into a great cloud of like almost evil or potentially bats, and he kind of just slips away. But he flees to Tol Nufuin, the land in the north, and then he doesn't really play a part in the First Age again. With Huan's victory over Sauron, Sauron goes, and then he's not really in the narrative for quite some time. So whether or not he's licking his wounds for thousands of years, I'm not too sure. But he does, of course, feature in the final battle of Beleriand, the War of Wrath, and this is when the Valar come in force to Beleriand with the elves that are currently in Aman, it's said. And they throw down Melkor completely. They cast him out into the void. Beleriand sinks beneath the sea, as I'm sure you're all aware, because it's no longer on the maps. The Númenóreans are gifted Númenor, or the other way around. The Dúnedain are gifted Númenor, where they become Númenóreans. But as I say, Beleriand sinks. The elves, many elves flee to the east and establish Lindon. Others flee, take the opportunity to head back to Aman and stay there from there. But at this time, at the victory of the War of Wrath, Sauron surrenders to the Valar. This is when he next enters into the world as we know it. And he surrenders to the Valar at the War of Wrath. And it's suggested in the Silmarillion that, because he repents evil, and he says that I'm done with him, I'm done with Melkor, I'm done with evil. And it's suggested in the Silmarillion that he actually means it. that although it is because of fear of the Valar, he's in awe and he is terrified of the power that the Valar have, because they are better than him. It would be like a god coming into like, I always use Greek analogy myths, but it would be like Zeus rolling up into Odysseus's life. Odysseus is a mighty man in his own regard, but Zeus would still be able to crush him with a wink of an eye. So it's kind of that power play, and Sauron fears the Valar, and so he repents. And it is said that he is genuine. He does this genuinely. But he's so ashamed to return to Aman, where he is ordered to go by Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, that he flees to Middle-earth, and he no longer plays a part in any of the events of the First Age, but then obviously they end with the War of Wrath anyway. But he flees to Middle-earth, and he stays hidden for quite some time. And it's around about 1,000 years or so that he remains out of the narrative again now, into the 1,000 years into the Second Age. But before we dive into the Second Age, let's have a look at Sauron's names. Sauron originally is called Mairon, or Mairon. Mairon is his original name. This is a Quenya word, and it means excellent or admirable. And this is the name attributed to him when he is still a Maia over in Valinor, before the world is marred and all the bad events take place. However, when he turns fully to evil, and he comes against the Elves, he is then known in Quenya as Sauron. And it is Sauron, not Sauron. I know some people say Sauron, but it's not Sauron, it's Sauron. As if it were the word loud and then Ron, so you're taking the OU sound from loud and you're applying it to Sauron. And it's Quenya, and it means the abhorred. And the Sindarin equivalent for his name is Gorthar. So Sauron, Gorthar, and that means terrible dread. And that's these are the names that are used in the First Age. Now it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but in the Second Age as well, he's known as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and we'll come onto that in the next slide, because that's the main events of the Second Age for Sauron. Well, that's one of the two main events. When he goes to Númenor at the end of the Second Age, he takes the name Tar Mairon, and now this is the naming protocols of the kings of Númenor. They take Tar as at the start of their name. For example, Tar Elendil is one of their kings. Tar Palantir is one of their kings, and Tar is the names that they take. Of course, towards the end of the Second Age, the Númenorians take Ar as the royal name, because they have turned from the path of light, but we'll cover that in a moment. He's also the Necromancer of Dol Guldur. He takes the name the Necromancer then. Names that he gives himself are the King of Men and Lord of the Earth. They are both names that he himself gives him. They are partly the reason why the Númenorians come for him later on. And of course he is known as Sauron the Deceiver. That's probably his most official title, because he spends, obviously from watching the films, you may know him as just the great general, the head of this army. He just attacks people all the time. But when he had a proper body, he actually spent more time working people sort of mentally rather than he did physically. He really was a great deceiver, and he twisted the minds of many, many people. So those are all of Sauron's names. So call him what you will. And Gorthar and Sauron are the two most popular, and Sauron the Deceiver is kind of the most official title, as it were. Okay, so we come into the Second Age now. Now, as I say, for the first 1,000 years he lays low, and he takes on the form, a great and fair form, and this is, after a while, this is when he becomes known as Anatar. What he does at the start of the Second Age is he heads out into the east and south, and he starts drumming up support from the men in the east and the south, and this is when the Haradrim and the Easterlings first start to turn over to Sauron. But he was always known that men are easily ensnared, but it's elves that he truly wants to have mastery over, for they are far more powerful than men. And so he then takes on a very, very fair form, which is known as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he begins mingling with the elves. He begins walking among them. Now, a brief little side point here with the picture that I've got is whenever you type Anatar into the internet and you get images, you will always get images of an elf that looks evil. And this is really, really inaccurate. When Sauron takes on the form of Anatar and becomes fair to walk among the elves, he really becomes fair. He would have looked so just completely, like, good, in inverted commas, for want of a better word. There wouldn't have been a hint of evil about him. Anyone that would have sensed evil would have been from his actions, from his words. It wouldn't have been from how he looked. But it's really difficult to get an image of Sauron where he doesn't look like an elf with glowing red eyes, or an elf with fire in the background, or an elf with a really devious look on his face. But he wouldn't have done. He would have looked like any other elf, really fair of face, tall, long hair, the whole elven package, because he needed to completely mix among them. Now, the elves, after the fall of Beleriand and the move to the Second Age, most of them live in Lindon. Many of the survivors live in Lindon, but a contingent of the Noldor do set up the realm of Eregion. This is also known as Hollin. And Eregion is just west of the Misty Mountains and just west of the Moria itself. And within Eregion they become great craftsmen, and it is said that Celebrimbor, their lord, when Sauron becomes involved, is the second greatest smith, second only to Fëanor, his own grandfather. And Celebrimbor is the chieftain, as it were, sort of, king, chieftain, however you would take it, of Eregion. And they have something called the Gwaith y Myrdain, and this is the Jewelsmiths Guild, or the people of the Jewelsmith. And they're very, very learned in law. But the Noldor, slightly separate from the Sindar of who never made it to Aman, but the Noldor, they really love Middle-earth. They really want to stay there. But equally, their hearts have touched the bliss of Aman, and they long for that bliss in Middle-earth. And this is something not shared by the Elves of Lindon. I mean, it probably would have been, but it's more prevalent in the Noldor. And Sauron touches upon that, because in the thousands of years that he's mingling among the elves, or in the 1,000 years that he is mingling with the elves, or in the time within that 1,000 years, he never goes to Lindon, because Gil-galad and Elrond, they can kind of sense that he's not really who he says he is. They can't tell that he's Sauron. They never find out that he's Sauron right until the end, but they never really trust him, so he doesn't go to Lindon. So he puts a lot of his effort into working the Noldor of Eregion. And this he succeeds by playing on their desire to have the bliss of Aman present in Middle-earth. And he worms his way in, as it were. He also feels that after these 1,000 years or so, the Valar have forgotten about Middle-earth, and they no longer pay any attention to it. So he thinks now is the time to start pursuing his own goals and his own desires for world domination. Because in the First Age, of course, he's only Melkor's lieutenant. If Melkor had succeeded, he would have ruled the world. Sauron would have only been a second in command, whereas now he has the chance to rule himself. So he begins his work, and he spends much time with the Noldor in Eregion, and he teaches them a great deal, because remember, of course, that he's incredibly knowledgeable and very skilled in craft. And the Noldor, chief amongst all elves, really take a delight in craft and smithing and creation. And so he works with them, and he teaches them all that he knows, and this brings about the creation of the rings. And he shows the elves how to create the rings, and he helps with the creation, and the rings are forged. And this is in around the year 1500 of the Second Age, I believe, somewhere around there. It might be 1600 odd. But the rings are created. Now Sauron helps them create the rings, obviously, but then he repeatedly returns to his realm of Mordor, where Barad-dûr has been. I think Barad-dûr has been built by this time. I didn't write that down, and I can't really remember. But Barad-dûr gets built and rebuilt so many times. Anyway, he returns to Mordor, where he forges the One Ring. Now, of course, because he has shown the Noldor how to create the rings, what he has subtly also shown them is how he can have power over them. So whereas they'll just see it as they're being taught, so 2 + 2 = 4, they won't see the hidden message that runs through that, which is him trying to control them. So he uses them to create these rings that will eventually allow him to have dominion over them. And he returns to Mordor, where he then forges the One Ring. And this, of course, many of us know as the Chiefed Ring. But it is worth noting that the 3 elven rings that we know, at the time of the One Ring's creation, almost all rings are sort of equal. But the 3 elven rings, as they become known, are at this time just part of the collection of the Rings of Power. They're not designated Dwarven, Men, or Elven yet. But the three rings in the middle of the image there, they were created last. And they were created by Celebrimbor alone. He didn't have Sauron's aid in creating those three rings. And whilst they do still answer to the power of the One Ring, they have slightly more autonomy than the other rings do. And that plays a little bit of a part. But anyway, so Sauron has come as them as Anatar, this Lord of Gifts. He's taught them a great deal. They've created the rings. But when he forges the One Ring and puts it on his finger, all the elves who are wearing the rings then are suddenly really aware of him. And they almost immediately learn of the treachery that he has wrought upon them. And they all take their rings off and they vow to not wear them. And as I say, the last three rings are given to very high-ranking elves, if that is such a thing. Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Círdan take these three. Or possibly, I can't remember if Celebrimbor gives Círdan the ring, or if he dies and then his ring goes to Círdan. Now, obviously he dies, but I can't remember if he gives it straight to Círdan, or if it goes to Círdan after his death. But anyway, these three rings are given to great elves, and they are hidden. They never wear them, they never use them, for they know that if they use them too much, the ring will gain power over them. But upon seeing that the elves have not fallen for his devious plan, and that there's been a slight hiccup in that they now know that he is a traitor to them all, they hide all the rings, and Sauron declares war upon them. And it's arguably at this time, which is now around circa 1500 of the Second Age, it's now around this time that it's arguably Sauron's height of his power. Because he owns all the lands of the Easterlings, they are all sworn fealty to him. All the men of Harad have sworn fealty to him. There is no Gondor, there is no Arnor, there is no Rohan. The Northmen are a bunch of hut-dwelling people in Rhovanion who aren't going to do anything. The elves are all pretty much hidden in their forests. And Sauron owns almost the entirety of Middle-earth. He assaults Eregion with a vast army, and he lays utter waste to it. Celebrimbor himself is slain, and then the orcs parade him around in front of their army on a pole. They really are pretty savage about it. And Sauron demands the rings back. Obviously, the rings are not given to him, so he lays waste to Eregion, kills Celebrimbor. He takes the rings for himself, save for the three that were hidden, because he doesn't know where they are. But he takes the Dwarven and the Men's rings, or what will become the Dwarven and Men's rings. And he now owns everything from Eriador all the way to Mordor. This really is the peak of Sauron's dominion on Middle-earth. But Gil-galad, obviously we can't forget that throughout this whole time, the island of Númenor has been growing from strength to strength to strength. And at this time, a fleet under Tar-Minastir, the king at the time, Tar-Minastir, with Gil-galad and Gil-galad calling for aid from the Númenorians, Tar-Minastir answers, and they come to Middle-earth. They land in the Grey Havens, and there's a really interesting artist depiction of Númenorians. I like it a lot. And they land in the Grey Havens, and together with the forces of Gil-galad and Elrond of Lindon, they eradicate Sauron's army. This is about 1700 of the Second Age. So we're about halfway through the Second Age at this point. And the Númenorians and the High Elves just destroy Sauron's army, and he's sent packing all the way back to Mordor, and it is said that no orc is left alive west of the mountains. They completely cleanse Eriador, and they send Sauron back. But he does have the rings, so his ultimate goal is still met for him. But this is he already feared and hated the Númenorians for the power they were given, for the grace they were shown by the Valar, and now he hates them even more. And this bitter hatred he has for the Númenorians lasts pretty much forever, and it really, really snowballs. But now again, because he can still take on any form he wants, it is now that he gives his rings out to the dwarves and to men. And interestingly, it's said that 3 rings are given to 3 high Númenorians. Obviously not kings of Númenor, because there is only one king, but 3 high Númenorians somehow get rings. And I don't understand how this would be, because Sauron, he really fears the Númenorians. He fears their power and what they can do. So I don't understand why he'd just go on a jolly to Númenor to give the rings out to 3 high-ranking people, but somehow rings go to Númenor and they get to Númenorians. And the others go amongst obviously the Easterlings, the men of the south, possibly some Northmen in there somewhere. And the rings, of course, go to the dwarves. Now, the ultimate goal of the rings is for power, and this he achieves, as we know, with the ring wraiths. They eventually succumb, and they merge into the Shadow World and become they become completely. They lose all their own free will, and they do whatever Sauron commands. But the dwarves are built of far stronger stuff, and they really don't suffer being controlled by another race or another power. And the rings do not have the controlling effect of the dwarves that he wanted. But they do bring a really deep greed and gold lust within the dwarves, which the Hobbit kind of plays on in the film, where it says about Thorin having that gold curse or whatever they called it. And that's kind of what the rings bring to the dwarven kings. And the dwarven rings are all lost. It says that some of them are devoured by dragons, some of them are devoured by flame, and some of them Sauron gets back. So in the end, the dwarven rings all either get destroyed, get lost, or get captured again by Sauron. So Sauron returns to Mordor, and there he waits for quite some time. He really does bide his time again, because it's quite a long time until the next event with Numenor. And I'll leave you staring at this picture as we discuss this one. Now, Numenor. Numenor was given to the faithful men in the First Age who fought with the Valar against Melkor. And these were men that came from the east. They settled in Beleriand, and they fought against Melkor. And for their service and for their loyalty, they were given the gift of extra long life. They were kind of raised up in stature above other men, and they were gifted the island of Tol? That's what island is in Sindarin. They were gifted the island of Numenor, which was raised out of the sea by the Valar of the Oceans, whose name I've completely forgotten. I want to say Ulmo. Anyway, so this island is raised out of the sea. Yavanna blesses it with all the flora and fauna she can and makes it really fertile, really wonderful island. And the Númenóreans are given this gift, this great gift. And obviously they've got elongated life. Their first king is Elrond's twin brother, who opts to live the life of a man. And the Númenóreans rise really quite rapidly and well. At the height of their power, they're arguably one of the strongest nations in the entire history of Middle-earth, bar the armies of the Valar. But the Númenóreans are never... There's a ban on Númenor, because the Valar fear that if the Númenóreans ever saw a man, or Valinor, they may crave that the peace and the sort of love of the Blessed Realm. So the Valar impose a really arbitrary ban whereby they just say you can never sail out of sight of Númenor on its western side. So on the eastern, northern and southern sides, go where you like. But on the western side, you can't sail out of sight of Númenor itself. And the Númenóreans, as with, I think, any humans who live in a reality where there are beings that can't die of old age, the Númenóreans slowly turn really quite envious of A, the Valar, and B, the Elves, who they frequently see passing from Middle-earth to Aman. Because the Elves often stop off in Númenor as they head west. And they bring lots of gifts and lots of just presents and stuff. And the Númenóreans slowly become really envious of the Elves' ability to never die, and this is something that the Númenóreans crave. And also in time they become really greedy, and lust and desire for eternal life, and their greed really starts to take hold. They also really question this ban. They feel like it's been wrongly imposed upon them, and they don't really think it's very fair. And they become the creators of their own downfall. They orchestrate their own downfall. And eventually in time they start getting kings who really come to actually almost hate elves. They ban Elven in their courts. They take Ard instead of Tar as their royal prefix to denote their kingship. But the Númenóreans in power still grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Until we get to the time of a king called Ar-Pharazôn. And his name means the Golden. And Ar-Pharazôn takes the name, which does mean the Golden, but the Númenóreans at this time see themselves as kings of pretty much everything. And indeed, they have a king who even takes the name Lord of the Earth or something like that, because they've fallen so far from the Númenóreans who helped defeat Sauron in 1500. It takes them about 1,500 years to go from solid, stalwart allies of the elves to enemies of the elves. And this is, as I say, the day that Ar-Pharazôn comes to power. But in this time, Sauron has also been growing in Middle-earth in power. And he's been gaining allies and gaining armies and growing in strength. And he's even getting strong enough now to assault certain ports and havens that the Númenóreans have established in Middle-earth. And in time, he takes the name Lord of the Earth or King of Men. And Ar-Pharazôn, feeling that that really is his title, he comes to Middle-earth with a massive army, an absolutely phenomenal army. So great in power is the Númenórean army that when they land near Umbar, they march completely unheeded. It doesn't really say where to, but it's assumed Mordor. They march unheeded to Mordor, and no one fights them. And their power is so great as well that Ar-Pharazôn commands Sauron to come down out of Barad-dûr and come and surrender to him. And Sauron, seeing that all of his servants are no match for the might of Númenor arrayed against them, he willingly comes down with no question. And he comes down to Ar-Pharazôn. But then he sees how debased and how low the Númenóreans have come. And he senses that there's a trick here. Because Ar-Pharazôn wishes to capture Sauron and take him back to Númenor so that he can no longer control and destroy Middle-earth, essentially. And Sauron secretly is delighted at this prospect. Because, as I say, he's actually an awful lot better of winning the hearts and minds of people than he is winning overall battles. And so, whilst he feigns disgust and hatred at the idea, secretly he's delighted to return to Númenor with Ar-Pharazôn, who is the gentleman depicted in the centre there. Now, he goes to Númenor as a prisoner, but after a mere 3 years, he manages to rise up to become the chief counsellor of Ar-Pharazôn. He's so quick-witted and he's so clever and devious that in 3 years he goes from a prisoner to a councilman. It's mental. And he becomes Ar-Pharazôn's most trusted advisor. And Númenor now at this time has fully turned from the Valar, and Sauron has even worked it so that they now also kind of worship Melkor. Because one thing that the Númenóreans have grown to now really try and find an answer to is eternal life. Their major downfall and the cause for the downfall and the culmination of it is that they really want to know how to live forever. And Sauron plays on this, and he uses it to his advantage. Particularly a little later on. But using this to his advantage, he kind of gets them the same way that the Emperor gets Darth Vader in Star Wars, by saying, "Look, if you worship this Melkor guy, he's got the answer to eternal life. So join me. Let's worship him together, and we'll find out together." Similar sort of thing to Anakin and the Emperor. But, so a large number of Númenóreans, like almost the entire population of Númenor, starts to give over to this Melkor worship, but there are a few faithful. And the faithful chiefly reside in the city of Romena, which is here on the eastern side of the Isle of Númenor. The capital of Númenor is Ar-Menellos, this city just here, at the base of Meneltama, Mount Meneltama in the centre. And Mount Meneltama is a hallowed mountain, and nothing sits at the very top of it, and it's saved for the worship of Eru Ilúvatar. But they no longer worship Eru Ilúvatar, they now worship Melkor, save for the few faithful who now reside in Romena. Now at the time of Ar-Pharazôn, the chief proponent of the Eru Ilúvatar and the leader of the faithful is a man called Amandil, and he is the father of Elendil, who we all know from the Last Alliance. And all of the faithful removed from Andúnië, where they used to reside, and they live in Romena. And a side little story here to just give you a bit of information about Isildur, because all you know really of Isildur is that he's the idiot who didn't destroy the ring. But he also does do a much greater thing, and that is that the White Tree of Gondor is descendant from a White Tree of Númenor that itself is descendant from, I believe, Telperion, the great tree that gave light to Valinor. And the White Tree stands in Ar-Menellos, the capital of Númenor. But Sauron tries to get Ar-Pharazôn to cut down the tree, for he believes it is a symbol of Eru Ilúvatar and it will help him gain complete control of this island. Because remember that Sauron hates the Númenóreans above all else. He absolutely despises them, and he's come here purely to orchestrate their downfall. Their complete downfall, their death, and especially the death of their ridiculously proud king, Ar-Pharazôn. He hates Ar-Pharazôn especially. But the White Tree in Ar-Menelaus, he tries to get him to cut it down. Now Ar-Pharazôn says no, because he believes that the power of the king is linked with the power of the tree, and the symbols need to exist together. But Amandil, being far-sighted, realizes that Sauron will eventually win out, and he suggests a plan to get the tree back. And Isildur is the agent who gets the tree back, but it's not that simple. At this time, with Sauron back in Númenor, the faithful are really, really shunned, and they're like outcasts. Very, very similar, but not quite as drastic as the events of the Holocaust. They live in this land, but they could be killed at any moment by the unfaithful, who view them as enemies and disgusting beings and that sort of thing. So the faithful of Rhomenna aren't allowed in Ar-Menelaus, and they're not allowed, certainly not allowed, in the courtyard where the White Tree is housed, and it even has a guard set on it. But Isildur takes up a disguise, and he makes it all the way to the courtyard. And when he is getting a piece of fruit from the tree to take back to Rhomenna, he is then spotted by the guards, and a great fight ensues, and Isildur fights his way out, but he is almost mortally wounded. Were there not some higher power at work here, Isildur would have died. But he makes it back to Rhomenna, and he gives the fruit to his grandfather Amandil, and then he collapses on the floor into a death-like state. And they plant this seed, and the tree sprouts, and upon the first sprouting of the leaves of this great tree, Isildur awakes from this death-like trance, as if there'd never been anything wrong. And it's kind of like a little bit of a symbol that the power of the Valar does exist in the faithful of Rhomenna. And so Isildur, that's how the White Tree escapes to Middle-earth, into Minas Tirith and Osgiliath, and Minas Ithil. But back to Sauron and the unfaithful. Sauron has now completely taken control of the minds of the Númenóreans, and he even gets them to construct a great temple of Melkor, which is kind of depicted in the background here, with a white tree in this courtyard. And he constructs this great temple, and it has a large domed ceiling. And it's from here that the Númenóreans then commit their most heinous atrocities, and they now sacrifice the faithful to try and find the answer to eternal life. They actually capture faithful Númenóreans and they sacrifice them in this temple. They commit a great deal of other atrocities in here as well. So Sauron is loving it. He has turned this great proud nation into nothing more than infighting murderers, and it's exactly what he's after. A lot of time then passes, and Sauron's final plan can come to fruition. Ar-Pharazôn is now coming close to death. And coming close to death, he now fears death more than ever before, and he now desperately seeks the answer for life eternal. And he counsels Sauron, and Sauron counsels him, and he says, right, the answer to eternal life then is held by the Valar in Aman. I suggest we sail to Aman and we take it by force if they don't give up the secret themselves. And Ar-Pharazôn is now so twisted and so bitter and practically dead himself anyway, that he agrees, and a great fleet is assembled by the Númenóreans to attack Aman, Valinor. They're going to attack the Valar. They're basically going to attack their own god, or gods. Sauron, interestingly, doesn't join this fleet. He stays in his temple in Númenor. And there is a little bit that when the fleet is getting assembled on the western shores of Númenor, the eagles of Manwë assail the fleet, and there are great thunderstorms and lightning, and there's horrific cloud cover. Not a great day for sunbathing. And the lightning crashes down, and it kills men left, right, and centre. And it's said that at this time Sauron stands atop his temple, out completely facing the elements, and the words are that he defies the lightning. And in this moment, the Númenórean unfaithful practically worship him as a god. This is the final tipping point, that he is basically a god. He can defy this unholy lightning. But the fleet sails for Aman, as I'm sure many of you are aware. Númenor becomes destroyed because of this. Ar-Pharazôn sails with a huge fleet. Tolkien describes it as an archipelago. There are so many ships. And But Ar-Pharazôn and his leading ships and a contingent of his most elite units, they set foot on Oman, something no mortal has done since Eärendil the Mariner, and that was for a far greater cause. And Ar-Pharazôn steps foot, and the moment that he does, the Valar are horrendously troubled. They don't know what to do. But Eru Ilúvatar himself steps in. This is one of the few times he actually affects the change and the path of Middle-earth. Of course, the other as well, I believe he sends Gandalf back himself, not the Valar. But Eru Ilúvatar steps in himself, and he creates a great chasm in the ocean floor. He quite literally splits the earth apart, and the sea and all the ships are sucked into this great chasm. And of course, the great chasm then creates this huge tidal wave which sweeps Númenor away. And Númenor becomes completely covered and completely destroyed. And Sauron at this time is also destroyed. His body is destroyed by this great wave because he's sitting in his temple when the fleet is downed. And Ar-Pharazôn himself, the leader of the army and the king of Númenor, he is trapped in a cave called the Cave of the Forgotten for some reason. And it's said that he doesn't actually die, but he exists on right up until the final battle, which I believe is called the Dag or Dagalak, which is the final battle, and that's kind of like the Middle-earth equivalent of I can't remember the name of it, Ragnarok in the Norse mythology. It's a very similar concept there. Melkor will break out from the void. I think it's Turin who's said to fight Melkor at the end. I can't really remember. And it's said that Ar-Pharazôn will not return until this great battle, the Dag or Dagalak. Battle of all battles. And so Sauron's body is destroyed and his spirit lies in the ocean or wherever it goes, and it eventually does return to Mordor, and along with, of course, the now two nations of Gondor and Arnor. But Gondor and Arnor only exist for 111 years before the last alliance. So in 111 years, Sauron goes from nothing to a full army, to attacking Gondor, to then being besieged by this great Númenorian and Elven force. And that, of course, he does, and you all know the events of the last alliance. Although what is different from the film to, and something I've spoken of quite a lot with my friends actually, that they don't really realise, is that Gil-galad and Elendil actually fight Sauron in hand-to-hand combat. Yes, they are both killed, but he isn't some giant with a massive mace, ghostly figure who just beats and smashes everything around. They actually fight to him in hand-to-hand combat, and Isildur, whilst fighting with him, cuts the ring from his finger after they've defeated him. So they beat him down and they kill him that way. It's not like Isildur gets knocked down, the shards get broken like that, and then he cuts his hand off in that reach-out formation. They actually fight like men as I say, in hand-to-hand combat, and the ring is cut from his finger during the fighting. And that it brings about his second bodily destruction. And that ends the Second Age, and then we move into the Third Age. And now, relative to the First and Second Age, Sauron actually has very little to do in the Third Age, and that is covered by the fact that this one picture covers almost his whole history of the Third Age, and this is Dol Guldur. And there is very little to talk about now, so we're on the final tracks, I'm afraid. And that is that after his defeat in the last alliance, his spirit flees. And for 1,000 years he hides in the east or the south amongst the Easterlings and the Southrons, until the year 1000, when he returns and takes up his place in Dol Guldur, about 1050. And this is when he becomes known as the Necromancer. He still doesn't have full bodily form, he's still quite spirit related, because of course he's now lost the ring, and the ring has almost all his power. The Nazgûl return in the year 1300. Because they too cannot die, save for the destruction of the ring now, because they're already dead. And you can't, it's like that kind of paradox, you can't kill something that's already dead. But you can because of what happens with Éowyn. But anyway, by the by, the Nazgûl come back in 1300. And then there's a period of about 1,000 years where Sauron just stays in Dol Guldur, perfecting his necromantic art. And it's Gandalf enters Dol Guldur in 2063 of the Third Age. But Sauron, who doesn't feel that he's ready to confront the forces of the world yet, flees before Gandalf. So Gandalf doesn't find anything there. And Sauron flees for about 400 years. 400 years, sorry. And again, he flees into the east. And again, he has no effect on the world. And this is a time known as the Watchful Peace of the Third Age. But he does come back in 2460 and again takes up his residence in Dol Guldur as the Necromancer. 400 years later, Gandalf comes back. And this time, Gandalf discovers that it's Sauron who is there. And he pleads with the White Council to attack him. And obviously, as I explained in the Astari video, Saruman blocks them at first, but then lets them do it. And about 100 years after Gandalf finds out Sauron's there, Sauron is defeated from Dol Guldur and sent packing by the White Council. And it's then that he returns to Mordor. And 10 years after returning to Mordor from Dol Guldur, now that he knows his game's up, he declares himself openly anyway, and in 2951, 60 years before the start of the War of the Ring, Sauron declares himself openly, Mordor is finally fortified for good, and the events of the War of the Ring can then kick in 60 years' time. So in the Third Age, he really has very little to do. He's kind of like a puppet master more than actually affecting change. He gets the Easterlings to attack. He gets the Southrons to attack. He himself, he sends his Uruks out, and he captures, obviously, that he turns Mirkwood into Mirkwood, where it used to be the Wood of Green Leaves, or whatever it was before, I can't recall. I know Erun Lasgallen is what it becomes after. But anyway, that's by the by again. And Sauron doesn't really actually have a massive effect. He spends most of his time in Dol Guldur as the Necromancer, not doing much. He spends nearly 2,000 years in Dol Guldur as the Necromancer, not really doing anything. 2,000 years is longer than the time it took the Númenóreans to go from being the most powerful nation on Earth to being the most debased nation on Earth. And he just sits in Dol Guldur, which is just fascinating. So by the War of the Ring, he's painted out to be this great enemy, but in the Third Age, he's not actually done all that much. So most of the lives of Gondor, only the Elves will remember this great evil being who destroyed Eregion, destroyed the Númenóreans, fought with Melkor in the First Age. Every other being in Middle-earth in the Third Age will just know him as the lidless eye, the symbol that he takes by the time of the War of the Ring, and that he's the one orchestrating their attacks. But other than that, all they will know is from books. And of course, the War of the Ring happens and the ring is destroyed. Now, because, unlike other Maya, he has sort of twinned his soul with this ring, the destruction of the ring brings about the final destruction of his physical form, and it is said that he becomes a mere spirit of malice. So after the destruction of the ring, Sauron, unlike other Maya, can never again take physical form because he has been so depleted and defeated. And the destruction of the ring is caused part of a destruction of his own soul to that, basically. And this brings about his final end. And it is said that Sauron just disappears and is never seen or heard of again. And that is the end of Sauron's tale. Now, I apologise that it's a bit bitty because obviously the First Age, the main events of the First Age, Melkor is the chief enemy. And the Elves are the chief side of good, with the Valar playing a part every now and then, actually directly. And of course, in the Second Age, again, Sauron drops into the history of Númenor after they've been going for around 2,000 years. So it's quite stop and starty, Sauron's involvement in the world, and he spends a lot of time in the east, in the south, in Mordor, just biding his time. He's very patient. But I do hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been of a similar quality of the Astari. Please feel free to leave any feedback that you will. I will, of course, also just take this opportunity to remind you that 2 weeks today I will be going away. I'm travelling for 2.5 months, so there will only be 2 more lore videos, and then there'll be 2.5 months of none. So whilst the DAC Let's Play videos will continue, because I'm pre-recording those, there won't be any other videos. So there's only 2 more lore videos to come. And I haven't even thought of what I will do for them yet, so we'll have to wait and see. Also, if you haven't already, on my channel at the top there is a video featured of Little Blue Ferret. Please feel free to check that out, and please leave as much feedback as you can. She's very eager to get going with... she's obviously got some videos already, and I really enjoy watching her, and I'm featuring quite a few of her videos. So if you haven't checked those out, please feel free to do so. They are just her and I playing some games, or her playing some games, and I just like her narration, and she is my other half, so feel free to go and see that even modders do have girlfriends, and we are normal like the rest of you. But anyway, that will end this video. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. Please feel free to leave any comments that you will. And until we speak again, dear friends, Navar Naden Pedimad Melonin, and farewell.